Lovelace from York, Pennsylvania, close by. And I'm going to be the one watching the clock because I've learned that people who like me who wear collars don't believe in clocks because God made time, and as my good friend Creon always says to me, Father, there's plenty of it. And she's right. But, we have a wonderful panel here. We're going to talk about judicatories and how our judicatories responded to these agreements. I've asked folks on the panel to introduce themselves and then to talk about that. They'll talk for about 10 minutes, which will allow us a little bit of time for questions. But your schedule says we're going to stop at 2:45. We're actually going to stop at 2:30, so we have time to get to worship at 2:30.
For me,
Start.
I'm going to stand up so I can see you all in the back of the lectures. Because I'm a little thing. I'm grateful for the opportunity to greet you and say a few words on behalf of the United Methodist Church. I'm one of the 59 United States bishops in the United Methodist Connection, and I serve the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference as well as the Peninsula Delaware Conference. It's about 800 churches, and I have the most fun. But for sure, we are a denomination that plays a lot with everybody. Our founder, John Wesley, was very much a part of ecumenism. And so I really was encouraged by the talk today that gave voice to the importance of grassroots efforts, which is really where we've mostly ever been, but we do high-level conversations as well. But I want to highlight some things that are happening in my area with regards to grassroots cooperation with the various sister churches and denominations. One thing I'm real proud about is in this conference, the Lutheran, the ELCA, and the United Methodist Church have partnered together in establishing a new church start with a Latino community in the Eastern Pennsylvania. Together, one has the building, one has the money, we put it together and work. Another thing I am participating in is working with the seminaries in Eastern Pennsylvania that are from different denominations. The United Methodist Church has 13 seminaries, but none of them are in Eastern Pennsylvania, but we have 5 seminaries that are non-United Methodist, but we have relationships with them. And so, as the United Methodist Bishop, I relate to these seminaries and to the judicatories that they represent. That includes Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia, Lancaster, which is the UCC, Moravian in Bethlehem, Palmer Seminary, which is in Philadelphia, which used to be Eastern Baptist, and the Evangelical Seminary in Myerstown, Pennsylvania. And in each case, we do things like resourcing, worship, workshops, lectures, that kind of thing. Working and learning from each other. Something that just happened grassroots this summer, it's historical. I'd like to announce that the United Methodist, the ELCA, and the Episcopal Church Deaf Ministries met in Chicago to merge their efforts to do better what they can't do separately. All 3 of those denominations have worked with deaf people and actually have had separate standalone deaf churches. I used to myself work in a deaf church in Baltimore for many years, and we just increasingly saw the need to do more collaborations because of the numbers and the plethora of talent that comes from our different bodies. So they made history by agreeing to meet every 2 years as deaf people and resource one another's workshops, train pastors around, and learn ways of understanding each other better, how we each do things differently. Another thing that happens in the United Methodist Church in my area is to have mission connections where pastors are intentionally clustered geographically to do mission locally. And the mission connections are led by a pastor in that local area. And they're encouraged to do partnering with all of our ecumenical sisters and brothers and even interfaith collaborations. So I just heard from all my mission connectors this fall when we had our district meetings, and I'm proud to say a great number of these efforts are interfaith and ecumenical. So there's a mission connection in some little town where all the churches are working together, doing a food bank together, doing social witness together, doing things that separately would be duplicative. And you do it together, you get more done, and you have more fun. And finally, the Religious Leaders Coalition, I'm a part of that in Philadelphia, where interfaith and ecumenical judicatory heads meet on a regular basis, and they make mission statements and speak for justice issues many times, collaborate on social justice kinds of things, as well as ways ways of doing work in the city of Philadelphia better, because there's a lot of poverty in Philadelphia, a lot of issues that we can do together much better. So there you have it. United Methodist in one fell swoop. Is that it? I'm going to quit.
Good afternoon. I first must bring you greetings from my bishop, which is James Walker, who is the presiding prelate of the 7th Episcopal District of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. I am also honored to serve under Bishop Peggy Johnson, who is the presiding prelate of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of the United Methodist Church. So you see some of that in action today. When it comes down to the Pan-Methodist Commission, I want to first say it's exciting to see the two churches where the Pan-Methodist Council join in full communion with the United Methodist Church. And it has a lot of different implications to it. But the basic element is that we are brothers and sisters in ministry. That's a big difference than working with the United Methodist Church, if you would, without that full agreement. It has an us and them texture to it. You know, we can worship together, but we are not on the same. We're not in the same family. And so today, I think that makes a big difference that accepting or that vote that happened in 2012 at the General Conference of the United Methodist Church. Something about African American churches. Let me start by talking about my church, which is the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. We were, the Methodist Episcopal Church was broken in half by because of one of the bishops in the Methodist Episcopal Church had owned a slave, if you would. And so the Methodist Episcopal Church South was broken into a group of Methodist Episcopal Church families that also encouraged and had in it ex-slaves. Those ex-slaves at that time were called colored, which was a very esteemed term at that time. In 1866, at the General Conference, they decided that we could not work together in the sense that meet all the needs of the colored slave, educationally, meeting the needs. So the Methodist Episcopal Church South agreed to and supported the movement of the African American church or the African American family to become its own denomination. And so in 1870, 4 years later, at the First General Conference, the Colored Methodist Episcopal Church was formed. And I think that's important because they were formed in union. They were formed together. It wasn't a break of anger. It was a break of meeting the needs of one another. And so in that line, the Colored Methodist Church changed its name to the Christian Methodist Church, Episcopal Church, to allow itself to be a little bit more open to different backgrounds and to be more diverse. The United Methodist Church has always been part of the Pan-Methodist Commission, just not in full communion. As we begin to move forward in looking at what happened, we're always working well together in mission. Today, there's two big efforts, and one of them is the children in poverty, and the other one is the Methodist United in Peace. And in this whole model of working together, you see church pastors being changed and exchanged between denominations, and it's really wonderful as the United Methodist Church moves pastors and puts them alone in the United Methodist system, but it also doesn't work necessarily the same way. So the challenge is, if you're an African American, historically black church, how well or how easy is it to accept those of different backgrounds into your own church? And I think that it's important to note that the reason it's not necessarily racism. The reason is that there's an ideological structure that says that in the African American churches, you have leaders that look like you. And then if you bring other people over, you're reinstituting that concept of powerlessness, if you would. And so that's very important as we begin to share in the conversation or in the dialogue, will it work or not. It's interesting is that I'm serving the United Methodist Church, 1 block away from the CME church where I grew up. Absolutely 1 block down the street. And I never knew that this church existed until I was assigned there. Now, obviously, we're in communion or relations because that's my church. But it's interesting to note in the communities and in the neighborhoods how well are we as Methodist churches coming together. I think that this allows us to be able to say, let's worship together, and it's not a us and them. I think that one of the things that allowed us to become full community or the simple things were the shared resources. You know, that's important. And the shared clergy, I think that's important. The baptism and the Eucharist that we share. The accepting of the ordination or the orders between churches, that's very critical. But they all have to meet the same requirements, so we accept them without challenge. One of the questions that were asked, I was online and I kept seeing one of the questions as, is there going to be a difference? Because we're already sharing, is there a real difference between the two, other than accepting the ordination? And I will believe that it's a major difference, because when we are full communion, the racism element begins to modify itself. Because we're in full communion, the celebration of one another becomes very different. I think that's very important, to celebrate each other's type of worship. I think that's the best approach, because in order to celebrate someone whose culture is very different than yours, you have to at least know that your background is celebrated as well. Now, if you didn't know that there was any ethnic difference and you went into these churches, you might not be able to say anything or see anything, but that's not necessarily the case. I also believe that in this Pan-Methodist culture, we're trying to get more delegates from Asia, from Africa, those kind of countries, so it could be more represented, better represented in the dialogue. I think that's where, because of time, I have to close. And so I will say thank you.
I'm Marie Tjeltveit. I'm the Canon for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations for the Episcopal Diocese of Bethlehem, which is sort of the northeast corner of Pennsylvania. And we are fortunate to be in the heart of the Moravian country. Bethlehem is the seat of Moravian church in the United States, and so I'm going to kind of be talking almost like an Episcopal Moravian perspective. And I've been fortunate to be the third member of our diocese to serve on the Moravian Episcopal Theological Dialogue as the Episcopalian on the national level. And we then, in Bethlehem at Central Moravian, had the service that celebrated our full communion in February of 2011. And I got to sit behind two clergy women who were sisters, one Episcopalian and one Moravian, as we came into full communion, which was a wonderful blessing. And I'm now the secretary of the Moravian Episcopal Coordinating Committee. So I deal with things kind of on a national level, but I also deal with things on a local level. And it's been a real gift for me to have that connection. And I want to talk a little bit about how the local and relations can affect global things or larger things. I'm part of a group called Christian Communities Gathering of Northeastern Pennsylvania, which is an ecumenical group started by the Roman Catholic Diocese of Scranton. And because Scranton's kind of a ways from Allentown, where I live, I tend to carpool with a couple of Moravians, one of whom is Dave Bennett, who happens to be the president of the Eastern District of the Moravian Church, which covers a wide geographical area. And so on these long car trips, we started talking before we entered into full communion about what it would look like between Episcopalians and Presbyterians. And he was saying that one of the frustrations of the Moravians was that in their relationship with the ELCA, they didn't have very many clergy exchanges. And that's something they wanted to do with the Episcopal Church, and was the Episcopal Church really interested in that. And then a little later at a meeting here, I bumped into David Bennett, and he was saying, could we talk to somebody in the Episcopal Church about how you all dealt with going through the transition with all the issues around sexual, blessing of gay marriages or blessing of gay unions, all of those things. And our presiding bishop happened to come through the Diocese of Bethlehem, and I was able to help arrange for a meeting of the Moravian church leadership with our presiding bishop to work out these things. So we're just kind of, by happenstance, uniquely positioned to touch a much broader part of the church. But I've also, when we came into full communion with the Moravians, our bishop said, well, maybe we should get together and learn how to do this. And so I helped with Dave Bennett and then Sam Zeiser, who's the ELCA bishop at the Northeastern Pennsylvania Synod, who used to be the Lutheran pastor down the street from me, another friend. I said, well, let's all get together. And so our two bishops and brothers Bennett from the Moravian Church have been meeting together since about November of 2011 on a regular basis, building trust, and we call ourselves the Full Communion Partners. I want to talk a little bit more specifically about the Moravians. We have a connection also through Moravian Seminary, which is right there, and a lot of our Episcopalians go through that, so we already have some relationship. And just recently, Jane Williams, who's a priest in our diocese, former Methodist, teaches in the Pastoral Theology Department at Moravian Seminary, was invited to be to lead a program for the Eastern District of the Moravian Church, their leadership, because they have a lot of conflict right now following their synod vote being open to to blessings, gay marriages, and having gay clergy in relationships. So, and our cathedral just celebrated 150 years. And in Bethlehem, it used to be a Moravian city, so the Episcopalians put their cathedral as close as they could get, and on their 150th anniversary, they walked across the bridge between Central Moravian and the cathedral to celebrate the new relationship. And I've been able to bring greetings to the Moravian Synod, and so it's been, for me, that's the best part of full communion. The Moravian and Lutheran full communion partners, we have had at the Moravian Synod or Music Fest. Moravians love music, and they have big music fest. And so a couple of years ago, the Full Communion Partners organized a hymn sing of Episcopalians, Lutherans, and Moravians singing hymns from their tradition for the opening celebration of the Love Feast for the Moravian Music Festival. Our Bishop Zeiser from the Lutherans and Bishop Marshall from our church took place in the consecration of a new Moravian bishop, Chris Giesler. And then Bishop Zeiser and Brother Bennett were concelebrants at our Chrism Mass for the Episcopal Church. We invite a couple of people from one another's denominations to our clergy retreats or clergy conferences, depending on denomination. We actually, I didn't get to this last time, but we've been in conversation about starting a Ministry of Hope. We're not exactly sure what it's going to look like in a particular area where there's a lot of need that is within the geography of our three different denominations, and to do some social ministry. At our Episcopal Diocesan Convention, I give out copies of the Moravian Daily Texts, as well as having those people bring readings to us. We do it in October, so they have lots of copies left over at that point in the year. In terms of our relationships with the Lutherans, we have quite a few clergy, Lutherans serving in Episcopal churches, Episcopalians serving in Lutheran churches as priests in charge, supply clergy, interims, things like that. That's been going on for so long, it's just kind of in our blood at this point. And we've even had a Lutheran transfer from through the Episcopal diocese out in northwestern Pennsylvania into our diocese. And went and celebrated Bishop Zeiser's installation, right, here installed, with our bishop. And so, and we have a number of congregations working closely between Episcopal and Lutherans. With the United Methodists, we still have a little time. Okay, we had a couple of joint Eucharists with Bishop Johnson and in November of 2012 and 2013, and then we had a a clergy day that the Episcopal Church organized, where we invited all of the Methodists that are in the same geographic location that we are. So that's part of the Susquehanna Conference and part of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. And we talked about mission and baptism, and had our bishop spoke, and Marty Cox, who's a United Methodist, spoke, and we sat everybody at geographic tables so that hopefully we would get to know our Methodist and Episcopal neighbors and build relationships out of that. That was a really successful thing. It's an incredible, it's really fun to be doing this kind of ministry.
Do you know how to get a bishop to stop talking? Put him on a timer. There you go. So that's the only way it's going to work, folks, or we'd be here all afternoon. My name is Bishop Michael Rhyne. I serve the Allegheny Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Who knows where that is? That's not a Lutheran. It's not Bishop Dunlop, right? We're between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh. We start in Center County and go where State College is and Penn State is, right? We do have that. That's our claim to fame. And then you go all the way down the Maryland border. That's where we are. I used to tell people we're between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh, and they would say, "There's anything there?" Very, very rural. Very rural. Much like most of central and western Pennsylvania is. As you know, you get outside of Harrisburg or you get outside of Pittsburgh, you've got farms, you've got coal, and you've got little bitty churches. And that's not just Lutheran churches, that's UCC, that's Methodist, that's Episcopal, that's you name it. We have lots of little churches. So, what I get to tell you is that we have relationships with our ecumenical partners. One, we get to have relationships, but we also have to have relationships. And so I am thankful that we do have these ecumenical agreements, so I don't have to fight the battle of somebody saying, well, is this person qualified? Of course they are. I mean, we all know that, but we've worked it out. The way it worked in the Lutheran Church, it started in '97. We had our first big sign. If you all were in the history thing, just don't listen for 35 seconds. We had a big signing of the churches that are kind of the descendants of the Reformation came into full communion in '97, because that was 20 years before the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, which will be in 3 years. Isn't that uncomplicated? So that was the PCUS, the Presbyterian Church, the Reformed Church in America, and the UCC. And we have ecumenical agreements, full communion agreements with the Moravian Church, the Episcopal Church, and most recently the United Methodist Church. So we have a lot of people to draw from and to get help with. And in congregations and in synods that are maybe a little more rural, you just don't have a lot of retired pastors. Let me ask you, what happens in central and western Pennsylvania when people retire? You beat me to it. If I was president of Florida Bahamas, not only would I get to go to the Bahamas, but I would never have a problem figuring out who was going to fill in a church on Sunday, because all my former pastors are there, and they're enjoying it, and they can just, wherever, oh, you have a church with 3 people in it, you need a supply? Sure, we've got those people. What we have to do is 2 things. We have a lay ministry training program, so we have lay preachers who go out, but then we also involve and engage our ecumenical partners. The place that we do that the most in our synod is with our UCC brothers and sisters. We have one congregation. Now, if any of you were in the last one, I'll probably get this messed up, but just imagine I got it right. And I'm glad you're filming too. That's good. But we have one congregation that is served by a UCC pastor, and what's really neat is she has started to come to some of our educational events, because she said, well, if I'm serving this union congregation, I need to know a little bit about the Lutherans some. So that's been a very good agreement. But we also have 2 congregations where we'll have one Sunday they'll get the UCC pastor, one Sunday they'll get the Lutheran pastors. And they've been doing that for 100 years. So that works for them. As I said, we do that because we have to. We also have a congregation way up in the mountains of Clearfield County. It can't actually be 50 miles from anything, but it feels like it when you drive up there. And thanks be to God, there is a retired Presbyterian pastor that lives just down the road. So he serves that congregation for us. So what we do is we're Appalachian. We're Appalachian. And so our people there are used to making it work because they have to. And so what do? We look around and say, well, who's here and who can work? And honestly, I think that might be the future of the ecumenical movement, that we will get together because we have to, because some of our churches are closing. We're not getting as many people to go into seminary. We're struggling in some ways. But at the same time, maybe it's God just going, okay, we're going to change things around a little bit. And so for me, if we think about, as I look at it, I think, okay, in 97, thank you, Jesus, for solving a problem so that I don't have it now in 2014. You know, I think Lutherans in general, we've always been fairly ecumenically minded, or actually we've always been trying to come together. Lutherans are always coming together when we're not breaking apart, but we're always trying to come together. At one point, there were something like 65 Lutheran bodies in this country, but over time, they kind of came together, and eventually, in 87, we formed the ELCA, which was all these congregations came together, and then 3 groups came together. So it sort of makes sense for us to come together. So if we see the Episcopalians and the Presbyterian, why don't we come together too? Let's find a way to make this work. I think in our seminaries too, we see this. Most of our seminaries, and probably most seminaries, or there are fewer seminaries that are exclusively to one tradition, to one denomination. And so I know the seminary I went to, which was the Southern Seminary in Columbia, South Carolina, we had a Methodist studies program. We had American Baptist studies program. We also picked up just about everyone else along the way, evangelical fundamentalists. We had other Southern Baptists who came and took classes there, and we worked it out. And I know that at Gettysburg Seminary, the Gettysburg is part of the Consortium of Theological Schools out of Washington, D.C., and a large number of the students there will go to Washington to take classes at Catholic, at Wesley, at the many places there, which I think enriches our understanding. Let's see. The other thing we do, I don't know if I said this, can I say it? Because I don't think I said it in the last one. You sure? Might take my time? I got plenty of time, okay. One thing we do intentionally is the judicatory leaders in our area try to get together. We have 2 groups that we get together with. Myself and Joy Kaufman, who is here, the presbyter of the Huntington, head presbyter of the Huntington Presbytery, and then David Ackerman, the Eastern UCC person. We're going to be getting together to try and say, what can we do together? I also meet regularly with the Roman Catholic bishop and the Carpatho-Russian Orthodox bishop, and we're trying to find ways to get together. And what we find is that we just talk. And as we get to start to know each other, what starts to happen? We're building bridges, and that's where we start working together. One thing we're going to try and do, and so I'll unleash it on you. You can steal it and say it's your own, and I don't mind. We're trying to put together what we're calling the working title, the Central Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania Week of Christian Service. And I will tell my congregations, we're going to pick a week, and that week you go do something somewhere other than your church, or for somebody other than your people. You know, if Miss Mabel needs her fence painted another Saturday. This one, go out and feed the hungry, work at the food bank, take food to the fire hall, help people out there. And so and as I've kind of brainstormed this idea, that our other judicatory heads have said, hey, that sounds like a good idea. We're going to try and get that. Last thing I want to tell you, okay? And this is what I hope you can take home. And I've got 2 minutes. Oh my goodness. I had an experience when I was in seminary. I was able to attend the Lutheran Roman Catholic Dialogue. And this is, and so do you know, and this was very good because the previous one they'd figured out we both are baptized. I mean, you know, does it take theologians to figure these things out? They have to work it all. I mean, they have to work it all out, and that's good and important work. But sometimes you go, we know that. But so in this, they had come up. I don't know exactly. I remember the topic they were dealing with, but of course, being the seminarian, you got to read. Any questions? Oh, I got one. And all these people who were there, like, wrote my textbooks. We're advisors at Vatican II. This is a big deal, right? I got a question. Oh, boy, hold on. And so I said, listen, this is good and great work. How is this going to be lived out? How is this getting out to the people of God? You would have thought I'd smacked the moderator with a wet herring. You know, this was a terrible... Oh, what do you mean? We did the work here. But the bishop, the Roman Catholic bishop who was presiding over the whole thing, he stood up. And I got worried. He's like, oh no. An archbishop. He said, oh boy. He says, you know what you do? You get your people together. And you have stuff and you get your people to come. You get the Catholics to come, the Lutherans to come, and you invite the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians, and just get them there. And do stuff. And they get to know each other, and they're building bridges, and then when we get to the place where now it's time to implement something, they're going to go, what's the big problem? We've been doing that all along. You know, on the high official levels, you know, we think this is so complicated. In the pews and the rest of the week, it isn't an issue for our people. They're just following Jesus. They're going, they're following Jesus, we're following, what's the problem? So it's that grassroots, building relationships, getting our people together. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Thank you.
950.
You did great.
All right. You want to see? Look.
The first session, they learned for this one to talk a little faster. We have a few minutes left. Are there questions?
I guess following up on that, I have a question. And I'm laity. Okay, I'm people in the food. And I hear this, you know, you can't say the word.
Judicatory.
Okay. There has been, evidently, I've learned today, you know, a lot of conversation going on. And the people in the pews, there's issues going on now. I don't think that they're really aware, quite frankly, that this has been going on. It's been kind of out there. And now with churches experiencing their problems and looking very inward, where are we going to take it out? You know, this coming together, I mean, it was really refreshing and encouraging to hear in the other session about the cooperation that's going on with some of the exchanges of ministers and churches. But where's the momentum? I mean, how do we see that going with this common agreement and getting more mix-up, if you will, and for the people in the pews to buy into this? I hope you understand my question.
I think he answered it by saying you get the people together.
Yeah.
It's all grassroots. I mean, you get the Bible school in this church and this church, get the Bible school together. Get the
Yeah, but what I'm asking is, when I ask you, what is in place now? What are we seeing now locally? Yeah, that's my question.
I'm glad to see it. See that?
You're seeing, I think, I'll tell you, a lot of places you're seeing churches work together, food banks, local ministries, homeless ministries, because, and I think that's the Holy Spirit, because what we see, there's a need, and one church says, hey, we're working on this, and somebody calls and says, hey, can we help with that? I think people are looking for places, and oftentimes looking for something local. So that's, I think, where it is, with those ministries that are going on in communities. Sometimes they just become ecumenical endeavors and become places that people are working together because everybody wants to.
Disaster is another place it happens.
Disaster.
When there's a big flood or a
That's
big
right.
disaster,
Yeah.
all of our official groups start pulling our people together, and I've seen great miracles there.
I think that when we talk about kind of issues of working together for social ministry and stuff, full communion is kind of a side issue because it doesn't matter if you're Presbyterian or Lutheran or whatever, we all kind of come together. But there are some models out there. If you, for instance, your congregation wants to actually kind of work more closely with somebody within full communion, I think in all of our theological documents, there's a section called Getting to Know You, which is a process for two congregations to come together from different denominations and explore some of your history and what you believe and things like that. And then there's a second piece, at least in the Episcopal Moravian dialogue, called When Did We See You?, which is for congregations then to take the next step to say, can we do some common ministry together? So we did, in my congregation, the Getting to Know You as a Lutheran, as a Lenten thing with the Moravian congregation and had a wonderful time. We didn't take the second step, but those are resources that probably if you Googled that phrase, you'd be able to find that. So that's specific for full communion, but there, anything is possible ecumenically.
Oh, definitely. I was thinking as you were speaking, God's been winking at you a lot.
And then the other thing is, like you said, the Holy Spirit drives the whole thing. is you don't give up. You keep going. All the things we're doing in my community between 3 churches, it's not always a smooth road, but you have the power through the Holy Spirit to just keep at it. You might have setbacks. Take a step or 2 backwards, and you keep going forward, you're going to make it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because it just reminded me of an image I use a lot. Life in the church following Jesus is a lot like being on a diet. Not because you can't have what you like, but here's what happens. What happens when you're on a diet and then you eat a cupcake? People usually go, "Oh, I run the diet. I can't I'm going to eat a whole tray of cupcakes now." You know? Or as it happens with most sinful humans, "Oh, I sinned. I better sin big now." As opposed to what are we supposed to do? Okay, maybe this didn't work. Maybe this what? Oh, so what? Get up and try again. And try again and try again and try again. So thank you. Appreciate you sharing that.
Yes.
I think there's a model that I've seen emerging in 2 different towns, Westchester and Lancaster, where there are ministeriums that meet regularly and are saying, you know, we're duplicating services. We're screening the same people over and over and over. Why don't we have a more unified delivery service for our local social ministries? And I think that is a grassroots ecumenical effort. And perhaps that needs to happen more.
I find that in the inner city, what you have is competition between churches.
Yeah.
You could have 15 churches serving the same 20 people, and they all have a food bank.
Yeah.
So people, one church to the next church to the next church, and there's some type of problem if you want to unite the churches. If you want to unite the churches, they have to be different ministries. So everybody can come together for the food bank. Everybody can come together for the soup kitchen, but not all at the same. You know, that's the problem that I find in the inner city. I think it's very real. Disaster is one thing that everybody can. It's a catalyst. Everybody can come together because no one person's doing disaster. So we all can go. Oh, there's a crisis here. Let's get together to solve the crisis. After the crisis is over, we go back into our separate churches. Worship. We can worship together, but we have to go back to our separate churches. So getting different denominations or groups to worship. In fact, within the same denomination, you have the same challenge. You know, you can go every other block and find the same type of church, and no one wants to come together because you know that's the reality of it. So the question is how do you bring that together? And so what unifies us from that? Other than we're going to close the church, you have to find somewhere else to go. I think that's the greatest. I think that's a real issue. I would call it competition.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah, Bishop, do you have much information about what's happening with Temple and Simpson, which is a long.
You know, that's the note I skipped.
Okay.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. We do have an interesting ministry in the city of Altoona. As it was, I've been to cities. Comparatively, Altoona is not a city, but it really is for central Pennsylvania. But you had a block, and on one half facing this way was Temple Lutheran, and backed up to it, and there's probably 7 feet between them, was Simpson Methodist. And they said, why are we doing this? In the 60s, I think they did this. But long before ecumenical agreements, long before any of this, they said, well, we know you, and our kids go to school together, let's just form a parish. And so they did, Simpson Temple United Parish. And what they did is the pastor there currently is a Lutheran pastor, and she's been there for about 20 years. But when she leaves, retires, they'll have a Methodist pastor there, and they just kind of switch back and forth. And then they do a Lutheran service, not necessarily maybe 1 month, or they kind of switch it up, and then they'll do the Methodist service, or Pastor Denise will sort of mix them together. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you that, Bishop, but oh no. but they work. It works. And I mean, and what's really neat was this was long before anybody was ever talking about this stuff. We also had, thank you for mentioning that, we also had one other unique situation on our territory. It was in the town of Shellsburg, Pennsylvania. 4 congregations merged together, and I think it was in '64. So I think they're coming up on 50 years now, 50 years. They merged together, the Lutheran, UCC, Presbyterian, and Methodist, and now they're Shellsburg United Church. Now in '64, this was such a big deal that it's on the cover of Time magazine. Their picture's not on there, but on the side it says like churches doing crazy things in Pennsylvania. It's like that. There's a big article in Time magazine about these churches coming together. 50 years ago, it seemed unthinkable. Now it just makes sense. So I think that says something, maybe. That even before we were official, people were finding ways to make this happen and make this work.
I think a lot of times it has a hard time happening because of our selfishness. That's my church. No, I can't go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's my church. Well, now my church, for the second time in my lifetime, is closing. And I can't be without a church. I'll visit a little bit to see which one I want to join, be a part of, but no longer do I have a church. My church is God's church, wherever He is, and He's everywhere. So, yeah.
I would say probably that one of the great benefits of full communion is that it allows us to look at other churches, which we may not have ever considered in the past. I think that's one of the greatest encouragements that address our own special needs of ownership.
I think it's not just selfishness, but I think that ecumenism and ecumenical relations are always things added on to whatever we're already doing, either as a clergy person or as a congregation. All the things I mentioned to you that I've been involved in, I don't get paid for that. I'm pastor of a congregation, and so I think part of what happens is, maybe it is selfishness, but it's just we're all busy people. And when you're busy, it's easy to hunker down. And even though if we open up, in the long run, it will not only benefit the world, it will probably benefit us as well. It's just hard to get over that hump. And so, that's part of the challenge, is nobody gets paid to do this kind of work. And so, but we have such benefits and blessings when we do make that effort.
And what made me say that is thinking of Thanksgiving coming, and we would have the Lutheran churches in town would all get together and do Thanksgiving Eve service. But so many people in the congregation I was attending at that time, which eventually closed also, would say, oh, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. It was not their church. It was Lutheran, it was, same theology, same liturgy, but, and that's why I said selfishness. It's mine.
I saw hands.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment that one of the things also that I noted, now we were a military family before, so services on bases were ecumenical. And then once he retired and we went out to the real world, but I did begin to notice that it was, for those who were looking for a church, there were lots of different, we started out going to United Methodist and now we're Presbyterian. But we would, in conversation with the people in the pews, find that many had come from various backgrounds. and therefore not really any knowledge of what the theology was of, say, of the Presbyterians or United Methodists or whatever. So I think it's been happening slowly overall, although today we're informed about the decline, culturally, generationally. But it's now, I think it's blooming.
Obviously, there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, God's calling us together in lots of different ways. Let's thank our panelists. And you're invited to worship.
And thank all of you for coming out and being here and listening to us gab, but being here today. That's important work. Thank you very much.